There is a viral debate going on right now about a husband who claims all he did was sign a permission slip for a field trip for his 12-year-old daughter, only to have his wife go off on him because she claims what he did was meant to embarrass her. Now, I am normally not a huge fan of internet drama. However, I do find these stories as a really interesting spot where we can learn quite a bit about relationships and things that we could potentially do better. So, today, what we're going to do is we're going to walk through this story and I'm going to share with you all the juicy details. And then we're going to look at what the internet thinks and also what I think and what I think we can take away from it. So, this story came from a subreddit, which is a small section of the popular website Reddit that is called AITAH, which stands for Am I the Bleep Hole? And the idea of this whole subreddit is basically people will share stories and then the internet will tell them whether they think that they were that thing or whether they think that they were not and that they weren't in the wrong. So the title of the story is AITAH for embarrassing my wife in front of our 12-year-old. So my wife, 42-year-old female, is generally great. One of her positive traits is that she is extremely well organized. She has all sorts of to-do lists, a meticulously managed calendar, etc. This is usually a good thing as she rarely forgets anything. However, sometimes this leads to somewhat absurd results, as is this example. The other day, my wife and I, 41 male, so wife is 41, he's also 41, they're sitting on the couch watching TV. Our 12-year-old daughter comes in and says she needs a permission slip signed for a school trip the next week, which she has right in her hand, and I see she's holding a pen as well. My wife pauses the show we're watching, gets up off the couch, and without her even saying anything, I know exactly what she's doing. She's heading to the kitchen to add permission slip for Katie, which I'm assuming is a made-up name for the child. If not, don't put your kids' names on the internet like that. Permission slip for Katie to one of her lists of tasks. I found this ridiculous because these permission forms take 30 seconds. You fill out your kid's name and the I give permission for blank to go to the museum. You sign it and you're done. Sometimes there's an extra question, such as a checkbox for do you want to pay $5 for your kid to have a school-provided lunch, or you can decline if you're packing a lunch for your kid. So since Katie was sitting right there with a pen, I filled out the form, I handed it back to her, and she put it in her backpack, and my wife gets back and plops on the couch and says to Katie, "Did you need anything else?" Katie says no and starts to walk away. I say to my wife, "Where did you go just now?" And my wife says, "To add Katie's permission form to my to-do list." I say, "Well, you can cross it off because I did it while you were gone." And she looks at me dumbfounded, and Katie starts laughing hysterically. I told my wife that I appreciated her organizational skills, but sometimes it's just easier to take care of things in the moment. And this was one of those times. Katie had the form ready, she had a pin, and the time it took my wife to add this task to her list, it was already done. I said that the alternative was at some point in the future, my wife was going to see this task on her list, yell for Katie, Katie would come running, my wife would tell her to go get the form, Katie would run back to her room to get the form out of her backpack, etc. Why bother with all of that when we can just take care of it right there? My wife agreed with my logic, but was peed off because she said I embarrassed her in front of Katie. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. If anything, she embarrassed herself by trotting off to another room to add an item to her to-do list that she could have completed in less time just by just staying where she was. All right, so that's what happened here. So basically you've got a couple, both early 40s, they've got a 12-year-old daughter. Daughter comes to them, they're watching TV, says, "Hey, I got a permission slip, I want to go on this field trip." Has a pen, has everything ready, goes to hand it to him. Wife stands up, silently, doesn't say anything, walks to the kitchen, adds it to a list. Dad says he knows exactly what's going on. Wife comes back, he asks her where she went. She tells him, and he says, "Well, while you were gone, I actually already took care of it." So there are and I will share with what the internet thinks here in a second, but I want to start by sharing what I think is wrong with this story. And there are a lot of things, particularly four in particular I want to talk to. So the first thing that I think is wrong in this story is the wife marching off in silence to make her point, right? To me, this is like performative communication, but in like the worst sense of it. What I would have liked to see is her, if let's say their family has this established process where, hey, when you need a permission slip signed, when you need something done, you put it on mom's to-do list and then it gets taken care of. If that were the case, why stand up and make this big spectacle of going to the kitchen and marching in there and coming back, instead of just saying, hey, Katie, you know that we have a process for this. Mom has her to-do list on the refrigerator. So if you want this completed, you can go put it on the refrigerator. But instead she chose to just kind of, trot off to the kitchen. And so I think she missed a teaching moment with her child here. And she also just displayed bad communication, so not only was she not teaching her child, she was teaching her, I think, in the wrong direction. So that's the first thing that I think is wrong with this. The second thing that really rubs me the wrong way is the husband saying, I knew exactly where she was going, right? I knew exactly what she was doing. And then basically she proceeds to do that thing. And so he knew where she was going. He knew what she was going to do. And he knew that while she was doing that, if he were to sign this permission slip, he would be doing the one thing that would probably really upset his wife. And that to me is just seems like really the wrong thing to do. Yes, I get the logic of it. I understand the logic that it is much easier to sign the permission slip there. Probably it takes 2 seconds. I get it. But he said he already knows where she's going. He knows why she's going to add the to-do list. So yeah, you got to be a little smart enough to know that she's going to come back and probably be upset about that. So I think he was wrong in that sense. I don't like that he did the thing that he knew was gonna upset her. The other thing that upsets me is that when she gets back, he says, where did you go just now? He already knows the answer to this question. He told us in the post, he knows where she went. And so he asks her this question like he's some detective or district attorney or car salesman trying to lead his wife to say the thing he wants her to say. Like he knows what she's going to say and he's trying to get there to close that sale or to make his point. And so what we're seeing here is we're seeing a couple that is using poor communication to prove their points. And the fact that they actually feel like they have to prove their point instead of just talking about it, where she could have very easily said, hey, this is our process. This is how we do it. So please follow the process, right? That would make it very clear then to everyone in the room, including her husband, like, look, I get that maybe it's more logical to do it this way, but that's not how we're doing it because we have a process and we are trying to teach our child to follow that process. I get that. But then that same token, when he gets back, and she's, where did you go just now? Like, you know the answer. Don't try and kind of, manipulate your partner around to say the thing that you want to prove your point that it was taken care of. So that upsets me. And the last thing though is when she then says what he wanted her to say, oh, I went to add it to my list. Then he kind of just says, well, I took care of it while you were gone. And I think, let me just read exactly how he said it because I think it's kind of important. Again, he's writing the story down after it happened, so maybe it's not word for word. He says, well, you can cross it off because I did it while you were gone. I know we can't read tone in this, but that feels a little snarky to me. That feels like hey, I'm just trying to make my point. So again, it's just a huge bundle of bad communication. And the worst part is that this is all taking place in front of a child who is trying to learn how to communicate better in this world. And I really think that there's some egos coming in play here where mom wants people to follow her system. Maybe she doesn't feel seen and heard. And so she's going about it this way to prove her point. And dad doesn't think mom's system is necessarily logical. And instead of just, talking about that with her offline, away from the kid, makes a point about it in front of her. And so I think quite a bit wrong here. Now, before I give you my opinion and tell you what the internet thinks, there are several unanswered questions here, and I think it's important to point out that these exist so that we don't kind of assume that we have all of the information before we make our verdict. So number one is there a well-communicated and established process in the house for how things like this permission slip get done? If there's not, but mom wants there to be, that needs to be communicated. That needs to be discussed. If I were this couple, this would be part of my follow-up conversation about this. Like, hey, it seems like you really were expecting this to happen, but that's never been clearly communicated to me or communicated to our child. And so figuring out how to do that, get that communicated, figure out what those parameters are. That's my first question is this process in place? Whether it is or not, it doesn't really change the fact that the way she reacted, I think, was wrong. But I think it's important, especially if you're trying to fix things going forward. The second question that we don't know is what was the tone of the comments, right? What was the tone of, I don't know if you can have tone of body language, but I think you can. What was, was when the mom went to the kitchen, when she turned the TV off, was it, everything pronounced, really trying to show that point? Or was it just, maybe she was just having a longer day and was just an autopilot and was like, okay, I got to do that thing. Like maybe she didn't even notice that her daughter was standing there with the permission slip and the pen in hand. Maybe she was just like, she heard, okay, I need a permission slip. Got it. Let me go put it on the list. Okay, come back. Boom. That's important, right? Because if that's the case, changes a lot of this. And then the third question, and this actually comes up from a lot of the commenters on the Reddit thread about this, is, are there pre-existing conditions? Is mom OCD, right? Does she have some tendencies that the family should be aware of and then also should be accommodating for, right? I don't think it's something where you can just kind of say as an excuse if it's not actually true. But if you do have some sort of a condition, some sort of way that you like to operate, you should obviously communicate that to your family, but then they should be accommodating for that. So I think that to me is something worth looking at. So the overall verdict from the internet was that the dad did nothing wrong, and that mom was just either caught in her routine, was either overreacting, or let me just read. There's a couple comments here that I thought were just, some people talk about the dopamine rush that people get from checking something off of a list, right? And maybe that's something that fits into the way mom likes to operate. There's this one here that I do want to read that says NTA, which means not the bleep hole, meaning they don't think that the husband did anything wrong. I embarrass myself in front of my kids all the time. That's life. If my husband points out something obvious to me, I may get embarrassed, but I would never worry about how it looked in front of my kids. They should see that we aren't perfect and we can take a little teasing, correction, and alternative ways of thinking. I like the direction that this commenter is going, but I don't fully agree with it in this situation. I do personally think letting your kids see you as real people, not see you as Superman and Superwoman, I think that makes a lot of sense. But they also need to see you as a cohesive unit. They need to see you as a team. They need to see you as a unified front with certain things. And so it's totally fine if mom and dad have different opinions about how this should handle, or maybe they want to change it. But I think that those conversations should be happening offline, right? So if there's a difference of if mom made a mistake and it gets pointed out, right? Not a big deal. What we saw here, though, was performative communication of this big song and dance, followed by instead of dad just saying, you know what, I should probably jump on the unified front here, not sign this paperwork, and then my wife and I can talk about it later and say, hey, honey, maybe it's better in the future, right? Something like this. Like, is this something that we could just do in the moment, right? Or is it so important to you? Excuse me, don't say that way. Or is it that important to you that we do it according to the process? If you say, is it so important to you? It kind of has this condescending tone to it. Not something you want to do. And so again, I agree with this commenter that it's okay for your kids to see you make mistakes, but I think it's more important for you to be a unified front. And I don't think this is just a whoops, made a mistake. I think this is mom and dad having a very passive aggressive argument, disagreement in front of their kids, just kind of masked behind nicer words. So again, majority of the comments here kind of say that they don't think he did anything wrong. I think everybody did something wrong. So hooray for positivity. No, but I don't think that he was trying to embarrass her, but I don't think he was being a supportive and communicative husband. And I think that the stakes are raised higher when your children are there. And so my verdict is, I don't like to use the labels that subreddit uses anyways, but I would say that he definitely has some work to do. Now, for her, barring the off chance that she just was in autopilot mode, didn't even register that her kid was standing there with the permission slip and the pen ready, barring that, I think she was caught up in her performative reaction. And the fact that that didn't go according to plan and that her husband pushed back on her, I think that's why she got embarrassed, right? And it's interesting, the internet, a lot of them saying whether she should or should not have been embarrassed. I think that's not a fair statement because, again, we don't know the backstory. We don't know what's most important to her, where she stands on certain things, right? I don't think it's our position to say to someone what you can and can't be embarrassed about. So long story short, wrap this up. I think communicate. Use your words. Don't do things to say, well, when he's going to know, when I stand up and march to the kitchen, he's going to know what I mean by this. No, the only way he's really going to know what you mean is if you tell him and you communicate it clearly. So that is my takeaway from this. We'll probably be doing more of these in the future. Again, I'm not a huge internet drama guy, but I think that these are really fun exercises for us to learn and kind of analyze how we assess certain situations and how we approach certain situations to better respond to them. So, hey, if you enjoyed this, you want more of this, you liked it, you know what the drill. If you could hit that like, subscribe, and that notify button. We're going to be doing this regularly several times a week, talking about all things relationship, dating, all that sort of fun stuff, digging a lot into data, practical, pragmatic tips, things where it's not one of those videos where you watch and you go, wow, that was really insightful. I have no idea what to do. Like, how do I make that be effective to me? And so that's not what we're going to be doing. We're literally going to be putting into, hey, here's the steps to take after this. So again, if you enjoyed that, my name's Jason. Thank you all. Like, subscribe, notify, share this with the people you think want to see it. Thank you, and we'll see you again soon.